encounter with the hide-behind took place in Kansas City when I was 19 years old. It's still surreal to me at times, as if it were a fragment of a dream rather than a memory etched in reality. I reside in a tranquil neighborhood with my family, nestled in a small town where excitement is a rarity. Despite my penchant for tales of the supernatural, drawn from the pages of cryptid encounters and eerie narratives, I had never experienced anything firsthand until that fateful night. Growing up, I devoured stories about cryptids like the Wendigo and the Rake, yearning to witness such entities firsthand, even if their existence posed danger. One chilly evening, after a long day at work, I found myself sketching in my bedroom, seeking solace in the strokes of my pencil. Typically, I'd spend my post-work hours chatting with friends or doodling fantastical creatures on my phone. However, my routine was interrupted by a reminder from my mom to take out the trash before retiring for the night. Reluctantly, I bundled up in my jacket and descended the stairs, accompanied only by my faithful canine companion, Scout. As I reached the ground floor, I noticed Scout's alertness, her focus fixated on something outside, initially dismissing it as her usual vigilance towards neighborhood critters. I proceeded outside, intent on completing the mundane task of hauling the trash cans to the curb. The night air was bitter, a testament to the encroaching autumn. With each step, the chill seeped deeper into my bones, urging me to hasten my chore. As I positioned the third trash can alongside its companions, a peculiar sound shattered the silence. It resembled the scrape of claws against bark, echoing through the stillness of the night. Startled, I turned to investigate, only to be met with a spine-chilling sight. Peering from behind a nearby tree was a figure, obscured by shadows, but unmistakably humanoid in form. Its emaciated frame and eerie stillness sent a shiver down my spine, summoning the last remnants of my gullible friendliness. I addressed the figure, assuming it to be a lost soul seeking shelter from the cold. "Hey, are you all right out here?" I called out, my voice tinged with concern. The figure remained motionless, its breath forming spectral wisps in the frigid air. Ignoring the gnawing unease in my gut, I turned away momentarily to finish my task. Yet, when I glanced back, the figure had vanished into the night, leaving behind a lingering sense of disquiet. Perplexed, I approached the tree where the enigmatic visitor had stood, only to find signs of its presence etched into the earth and bark. A sense of foreboding gripped me as I contemplated the implications of my encounter. Could it have been a cryptid, concealed within the shadows, watching and waiting? Ruminating on the possibilities, I retreated indoors, haunted by the memory of that spectral encounter. To this day, I remain uncertain of the true nature of the entity that lurked in the darkness, concealed by the veil of night. As I pondered the events of that chilling night, a flood of memories surged forth, each fragment weaving a tapestry of unease and uncertainty. The encounter with the hide-behind had ignited a curiosity within me, a desire to unravel the mysteries of the unknown, regardless of the risks involved. Little did I know that fateful encounter was merely the prelude to a series of harrowing experiences that would test the very limits of my courage and resilience. Yet, in the depths of darkness, amidst the whispers of the unknown, I found a newfound strength. an unwavering resolve to confront the shadows that lurked beyond the veil of perception. Lucy was a rescue when my grandparents got her, and as such, she came with her own set of issues. Despite her aversion to larger men and disdain for big dogs, she surprisingly developed a deep affection for the men in my family, including my grandfather. At first glance, Lucy resembled a large fox with her vibrant orange fur and bushy tail. Her breed remained a mystery, even to me, a registered veterinary assistant. The only certainty was her unmistakable German Shepherd lineage, evident in her pointed ears and unwavering loyalty. The morning after my arrival at my grandmother's, they announced their plans to hike Camelback Mountain, named for its resemblance to a camel's hump. As a typical high schooler, the prospect of a hike was met with reluctance. I longed to laze in bed, immersed in YouTube videos, especially since my older brother Jayan, my constant companion, was absent this year. Jayan, 6 years my senior, had recently turned 20 and decided to work to save money for his return to campus, leaving me to embark on this trip solo. While I respected his decision, his absence left a void, a stark reminder of the companionship I sorely missed. Seated in the car with my grandmother, I gazed out the window, basking in the relentless Arizona sun. Lucy's rhythmic panting served as a backdrop to my musings. Glancing into the rearview mirror, I hoped to catch a glimpse of her reassuring presence, a silent source of comfort amidst my apprehension. Exhausted from the journey, I succumbed to sleep, my thoughts drifting to a conversation with my maternal grandfather, affectionately known as Papa. A few months prior, Papa, a Vietnam War veteran, regaled me with tales of the jungle, painting vivid pictures of creatures lurking in the shadows. His stories, though unsettling, were tempered with invaluable survival advice, a testament to his unwavering love and concern for his grandchildren. His words echoed in my mind as I stirred from my slumber, my grandmother gently rousing me from my reverie. "We're here, Josh. Time to wake up," she murmured, her voice tinged with warmth as I emerged from the depths of sleep. Stepping out of the car, I rewarded Lucy with treats, a small gesture of gratitude for her unwavering companionship. As I stood outside, clutching Lucy's leash, I inhaled the crisp desert air, a welcome departure from the humid embrace of Indiana. The trail stretched before us, a winding path through arid terrain punctuated by clusters of trees and cacti. Engaging in idle conversation with my grandmother, I marveled at the rugged beauty of the desert landscape. Despite the sweltering heat, there was a serene majesty to the mountains, a testament to the resilience of life amidst adversity. Yet, beneath the surface tranquility, a sense of unease gnawed at me, a primal instinct warning of impending danger. Lucy's demeanor mirrored my own unease, her ears perked and body tensed in anticipation. My grandmother appeared unfazed, her confidence unwavering as we pressed onward. As we ventured deeper into the wilderness, the feeling of dread intensified, a tangible weight pressing upon my chest. Instinctively, I recalled Papa's advice, summoning every ounce of courage to project an air of dominance. But my efforts felt feeble in the face of an unseen adversary, lurking just beyond the veil of perception. Suddenly, the tension erupted into terror as I spotted a dark figure lurking behind a cactus, its form obscured by the harsh glare of the sun. Towering and imposing, it exuded an aura of menace, its eyes devoid of life, yet burning with an insatiable hunger. Though I averted my gaze, I could feel its malevolent presence, a silent predator stalking its prey. In that moment, I understood the truth of Papa's words. In the wilderness, survival depends not on strength or speed, but on cunning and resilience. With Lucy by my side, I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation, steeling my resolve to confront the darkness that lurked within and without. For in the heart of the desert, amidst the shifting sands of uncertainty, I would discover the true extent of my courage and the depths of my resilience. Flashlights to guide us, casting eerie shadows that danced along the shoreline. The beach, once a haven of laughter and joy, now seemed cloaked in an oppressive silence, broken only by the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. As we ventured further along the beach, a sense of trepidation gripped us, each step fraught with uncertainty. The memory of the previous night's encounter lingered in the air, a palpable reminder of the unknown horrors lurking in the darkness. Suddenly, a low growl shattered the silence, sending a shiver down my spine. My cousin and I exchanged nervous glances, our flashlights trembling in our grasp. With bated breath, we scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of the elusive Gator man. Then, in the distance, two yellow orbs materialized, glowing like twin beacons in the night. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as the figure of a man emerged from the shadows, his presence ominous and foreboding. In the flickering light of our flashlights, his skin seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly glow, casting strange shadows that danced along the sand. His form was distorted, almost inhuman, as if he were a creature of myth and legend. Despite our mounting fear, we stood our ground, determined to unravel the mystery of the Michigan Gator man. But as quickly as he had appeared, he vanished into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of dread. Undeterred, we scoured the beach for any clues that might shed light on his existence. It was then that we stumbled upon the tracks, deep, jagged imprints etched into the sand, resembling those of a massive reptile. Beside the tracks lay a piece of driftwood, its surface marred by strange scratches and bite marks. As I leaned in for a closer look, my dog's sudden growl shattered the silence, a warning that sent chills down my spine. Sensing danger, we retreated from the beach, our minds awash with unanswered questions and unspoken fears. That night, as we huddled in the safety of our home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled upon something beyond our understanding, something that defied rational explanation. In the days that followed, we scoured the internet for any information on the Michigan Gator man, but our efforts yielded nothing but whispers and half-truths. It seemed that the legend was shrouded in mystery, its origins lost to time. Despite our skepticism, the memory of that fateful encounter lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of our seemingly ordinary world. And though we may never uncover the truth behind the legend, one thing remained certain: we would never again venture into the depths of the unknown unprepared. The barn Mama Pam I ain't never seen anything run that fast. I asked her if she had seen the face of this thing, but she told me that she did not. She didn't get to see it long enough to see any real features. She said it only looked toward her for just a few seconds, and it was too dark to make out any discernible facial features, besides that it was bald. I know my eyes were as big as saucers. I knew what she had seen wasn't anything from around here. She told me it was very skinny, and again, bald, and it looked like it had trouble even walking on all fours, making it hard for her to believe that it could run so fast. She said on all fours. It was jerky, but it wasn't like that when it was on just 2 legs. I told them I thought it was a crawler, and could not believe she didn't come screaming for me and my husband to wake up. She said at the time, and in her 11-year-old mind, she didn't consider it harmful because it was frail and seemed to have such a hard time walking. But she did say that when it took off toward the barn, it was lightning fast. She said that's when she got nervous. She returned to bed with my husband and me when she saw how fast it actually was. I know she's telling me the truth because she's never been exposed to anything that would even remotely give her an idea for the story. Not to mention, she doesn't really lie, to be honest, and she slept with me and my husband for the next few nights as well. She's really not a kid to make up things. She's down to earth, a cheerleader, a soccer player, a softball player, and an all-around well-rounded kid. I hope somebody listening to this in the swamp can answer these following questions. Have any of you ever heard these creatures anywhere else around Mississippi, Tennessee, or the Alabama areas? She has a 4-wheeler, a bicycle, and does a lot of outdoor activities. I'm scared to let her go do those now. Are we in danger? Thanks for sharing my story. Too afraid to go outside by myself now as well. Something stalked our campsite by MJ. Hello, swamp dweller, and anyone who may be listening to this. I am a long-time listener, but this is the first story I have ever submitted. It has bothered and spooked me for almost a year now, and I would love any input that anyone has on it. Last year, around June, I was camping in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas, with my boyfriend James and his friend Lane. We were generally having a good time hanging by the creek, building a fire, and listening to groovy tunes. We continued to hang out into the night, and were all partaking in some drinking. This makes the next part of the story seem unbelievable, but trust me, it was just as incredible to us at the time. We were all sitting around the fire when James and Lane spotted a small fire off in the distance. This was strange, since we hadn't noticed anyone camping nearby all day. We ignored it for a bit, and continued having a good time until we all went to sleep around midnight. I remember waking up sometime a little bit later, feeling immediately confused and frozen with fear. It was still dark. I turned to James, who was already sitting up and listening intently. I heard sticks cracking just outside the tree line, just outside of the tent. I realized that there was either a person or some sort of creature walking around outside. I couldn't tell you if it was a bear, a wendigo, or some sort of freaking spaghetti monster. All I know is that we sat up frozen in silence, unsure if we should be afraid or not. Suddenly, I heard someone attempt to open my car door. It was locked. I heard 2 distinct pulls on the handle, and then an urgent whispering. James and I froze. We thought it had to be people at this point, and Lane was alone in his tent about 15 feet away. We sat waiting for whoever this was to leave with bated breath. I was terrified because of what happened next. I swear these voices, they sounded human, but the way they were going back and forth almost made them sound ethereal. This was something weird, The whispers initially started with things like this was a bust, and these guys didn't have anything suitable to steal or something along those lines. Then we heard a third voice come out of nowhere, saying maybe we check the tents. Frozen in fear again, we waited as long as we could in full anxiety mode. My mind was relieved when I heard their heavy footsteps approaching the fire that we had seen earlier. Now you might be wondering why I'm sending this in under the cryptic category. Well, that's because in the morning, when we looked out to see if there were any sort of footprints or anything like that, there were none. No footprints, no shoe prints, nothing. Also, when I said that the voices sounded ethereal, it almost sounded like they were whispering right in our ears. But somehow, we could hear them all the way across to where our car was. And on top of that, we did hear a lot of rumors about gnomes, fairies, trolls, all sorts of weird things that are said to roam these sorts of areas. So maybe it was something like that. Or maybe it was just a band of thieves who were incredibly light-footed. I couldn't tell you. What I can say, though, is we were all super freaked out since those people, creatures, or whatever could have severely hurt us if they wanted to. But we were relieved that they thought of our stuff as worthless or whatever. We decided we would not be camping anytime soon in that area, though. It came from the woods by Kate. Oh, my name is Caitlin. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin. Growing up, my dad used to mention this backyard beast. He didn't tell me what it was until I was about in middle school. A little bit of background before I begin. My dad was unfortunately hit by a drunk driver when he was just 17. The accident resulted in him losing his left leg and thus becoming wheelchair bound. He did still power through and worked a full-time job, working third shift. Our house is built into a hill, top to bottom, by a duplex that we shared with my grandparents. My parents lived in the bottom half, and my grandparents in the top. This bottom half was connected to a garage and patio, with doors on the side facing a patch of woods. I was only a little kid when this happened. I'm currently 22 years old now. Most of the details told to me about this were from my aunt and my father. My uncle was a high school football coach, and my family would attend all the games. My aunt needed to learn the area better, so she'd park her car at my parents' house and get picked up by my uncle after the game. My family went out for dinner, and my aunt wanted to go home, so my uncle dropped her off to go get her the car. My dad and I were the only ones home at this time. My uncle pulled out of the driveway and left. My aunt set her purse down and whatnot and got into the car. Then she looked up and saw a tall creature that, as she described, had many features of a dogman or a werewolf. It was looking at the patio door through the glass. She kept staring at it out of shock, and the creature turned around and noticed her. It started slowly walking towards her car. My aunt buried her head into the steering wheel and, out of fear, waited. After some time went by, she saw the creature walking back into the woods. She turned the car on, floored out of there, and chased after my uncle, who was already down the road by some good time. Now, this was before the time that everybody had cell phones, so my aunt damn near ran my uncle off the road. When he pulled over to confront her, she was hysterical and said there was a monster at your brother's house and it was going to kill them. She was screaming at him. My uncle calmed her down and convinced her to drive the rest of the way home. My aunt called my parents' landline and told my dad everything. He immediately goes outside to investigate those woods, but he's never seen anything there. Honestly, I don't not believe her, but it does sound kind of crazy. But at the same time, I have felt like I've been watched from those woods from time to time. Screeching in the Woods by T. Hello, Swamp Dweller. It's me, T. I have another story to send to you. This story is a bit more, I don't want to say cryptid, but I don't know what else to call it. Anyways, here are the circumstances leading up to my story. I started a new job about 6 months ago, and recently decided to use a couple of weeks of vacation. I felt pretty introverted, so I hunted myself for about 2 weeks. Just my dog Chief and myself. He's a 150 pounds Newfoundland dog. Before I continue, Chief really isn't like most Newfies. He was born and has always lived in the bush for what I believe was the first year of his life before I found him, during which he developed incredible hunting skills. I found him caught in my trap lines about 9 months ago. I'll skip over a bunch of stuff to cut to the chase. We bonded very strongly during his recovery, and he is now a robust and healthy farm and guard dog. So I packed my backpack, and we set off for northern Ontario. 6 hours later, we finally arrived. A small green car was in the gravel parking lot, but I paid no mind. It's a big forest, and the odds are good I wouldn't even see that car's owner, more than likely. I loaded Chief up with his gear, shrugged my backpack on, and shouldered my .73 Winchester. Then we set out. Me and Chief hiked for a few hours, and once we found a nice clearing, I decided to set up camp. Once I had the tent pitched and a small but substantial fire going, I grabbed my mini fishing rod, and Chief and I walked down to the nearby creek to catch supper. While I was fishing, Chief wandered off, and I assumed he was just off chasing a rabbit or something of the like. Later, after I had seen 2 nice fish, I was on my way back to camp when Chief came back with what looked like a deer leg. It still had some meat on it, so I assumed it was from a fresh carcass. The end seemed weird though, as if it had been snapped and twisted off more than pulled and yanked. I let Chief chew away at it for a bit while I cooked the fish. I gave Chief some fish, and we enjoyed our meals. Once we finished our supper, we decided to scout where we would be hunting tomorrow. I decided to leave my gun at camp while we looked around, because where we were, it was prohibited to discharge firearms after dark. Anyway, that being said, I did have my tomahawk and headlamp, and we set off. About 45 minutes later, we had covered probably a mile or so, and at this point, we had entered a small canyon. That's when I heard a gut-wrenching roar that sounded like a woman screaming in agony. I froze, quickly taking my tomahawk out, and Chief crouched and growled. We were ready for a fight. Another roar and a subsequent scream was all I needed, and I took off in the direction I heard the noise. After about 100 yards, I froze, but Chief charged right past me. 30 yards in front of me was a monster. That's the best word I can use to describe the size of this thing. It might have been a grizzly bear, I don't know, but it had the frame of a wolf. It had tight brown skin and thick fur. It was on 2 legs and roaring at something on the ground. But that was all I saw before I turned and was met with Chief running silently through the leafy brush. However, when Chief knew that I had seen him, he let out his signature deep and menacing growl that had made grown wolves whimper in the past. With this 2-legged devil dog, whatever it was in front of us, it didn't even hesitate briefly. This was all Chief needed, as he was able to sail down, hitting the thing, making it fall over and running with me to get out of there. I've never seen a more brave dog in my life, but when you get hit with 150 pounds of muscle and meat going full speed, it doesn't matter what you are, you will feel it. After that, we noticed that there was a girl on the ground. Luckily, since the thing was off guard, we were able to pick her up and get her running off with us. Her name was Jenna, and I was able to personally escort her to the nearest hospital. On the way back, we learned that she was a rather avid camper and had probably been in this area multiple times camping. Northern Ontario has forests that are absolutely beautiful, but there are things in those forests that we have never seen before. Whether it's some sort of supernatural monster, some sort of crazy natural amalgamation, or just a weird bear, I don't know, but I don't want to find out. Scary. A bit further from the river to avoid any potential flooding. But on this trip, we wanted to be as close to the water as possible. We set up our tents, started a fire, and cracked open some beers to enjoy the evening. Everything was going great until we heard it. It started as a faint rustling in the bushes across the river, but then it grew louder, more pronounced. We all fell silent, listening intently to the eerie noise echoing through the trees. It sounded like something big was moving through the underbrush, something heavy. We brushed it off as maybe a deer or a bear, rationalizing it away as we continued to enjoy our night. But the rustling persisted, getting closer and closer. That's when we saw it. Emerging from the trees on the other side of the river was a figure, tall and hulking, moving with a strange, loping gait. It was too far away to make out any details, but its size alone was enough to send shivers down our spines. We watched in silence as it made its way along the riverbank, occasionally stopping to sniff the air or peer into the darkness. It seemed to be searching for something, though what that something was, we couldn't say. We debated whether to make a run for it, but fear kept us rooted to the spot. Our eyes locked on the mysterious figure. As suddenly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared back into the trees, leaving us alone once more. We sat in stunned silence for a moment before one of my friends finally spoke up, voicing the question that was on all of our minds. What the hell was that? We never did find out the answer to that question. And to this day, the memory of that night still sends a chill down my spine. It was a reminder that even in the wilderness, where we feel most at home, there are still mysteries lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. And sometimes, it's better not to know what's out there. I knew this for certain, because we had been doing the same thing earlier in order to break down large, dead branches of firewood. Another whack sounded, this time closer to my tent. I reached over and quietly scooped up my large Maglite LED flashlight and my machete. I placed them both in my lap as I sat up, cross-legged, waiting patiently. I usually carried a pistol with me, but left it in the car on this trip for a reason I can no longer recall. The footfalls at the top of the trail started again, one after another. This time I could feel the weight of them in the seat of my pants as they came. This thing was heavy. The ground vibrated with a thump under its weight with each step. My skin began to prickle as my neck and ears grew hot with the sudden rush of fear. The footfalls stopped within, and arms reached my tent. I listened hard and thought that I could make out the faint sound of something breathing quietly, ragged in the darkness outside. I knew it was focused on me. The crushing weight of its attention drove me to near panic, as though some long-forgotten instinct woke inside me and knew that I needed to get out of here. It needed me to run. It's the only survival. My breathing grew rapid and shallow, my chest tight as I continued to listen to the dead silence outside of my tent. Then, as suddenly as it came, the dreaded weight lifted. I felt and heard the thing move past me down the trail towards my friend's tent. The frogs and crickets resumed, causing me to nearly jump out of my skin at the sudden rush of sound. As the thing moved past me, I was able to will myself to the flap of my tent, where I slowly unzipped it enough from the top corner to get my flashlight through. I clicked my flashlight on and kept a tight grip on my machete as the bright LED beam lit up the night like a white mini-sun. I swept it back and forth and saw nothing of what had just passed, still too scared to get out. I zipped my tent up and resumed my cross-legged position for the rest of the night. Flashlight and machete held across my lap in case it came back. Dawn came 2.5 hours later. I heard the zipper of the other tent open, so I also emerged. I saw my friend exit his tent, bleary-eyed, as he moved off into the thicket of bushes to relieve himself in the pre-dawn light. I approached and asked him if he heard anything last night. He said he did, but he figured it was me walking around trying to creep them out. I told them it wasn't. He kind of shrugged it off and went back into his tent. I stayed outside and searched for signs of the thing, and I found nothing. No traps or depressions in the ground, no bent or broken branches or twigs, no tufts of fur or hair, nothing. When my companions fully awoke and emerged from their tent for breakfast, I addressed it with them again, and they again said they just thought it was me walking around. I described what I felt, but only got looks of disbelief from them. Something to note about this experience: there was no smell, which is something of a telltale sign of a skunk ape in the other folks' accounts of running into one. The only thing that really points it to being a skunk ape would be the tree knocking. And the one thing that makes me dismiss it as a person was the feeling of dread that it brought. Wave of fear washed over me as I realized this was no ordinary encounter. I had never felt anything like what I did that night. I had once been stalked by an elusive Florida panther, and it was nothing close to this thing. What was it? I may never know. Hello there. I've been listening to your program for a while and decided to share this. Maybe another listener has had this happen to them, because I still don't really know what this was. I grew up with acres upon acres of woods behind my house. A farmer owned most of it, but no one paid mind to us. There were huge fields on both sides of the woods, and the farmer, at one point, had trails going through the woods to move cows from one pasture to the other. My brother, sister, and I would regularly be found playing out there. There was a creek back there, too. We could fish or swim or muckluck or whatever you want. Mucklucking is basically playing in the mud, catching frogs and salamanders. We'd been out there in any weather, any season, in the daylight, in the dark, you name it. I used to hike the woods on moonlit nights as a kid and was quite comfortable in its surroundings. The location of my home was in southeastern Pennsylvania, Chester County. The area still had plenty of open space at the time, and wildlife was really just foxes, raccoons, deer, squirrels, etc. Nothing too scary or aggressive, and the coyotes hadn't come back at this point. I'm about 10 or 11 when this occurred. My friend Haley and I had been hiking for most of the morning and had gone up through the hills, through the woods, to the top of the pasture. The trees were less there, and they had these huge vines that we used to make swings out of. We had hung out for a while, and then headed back down the hill towards the woods. The day was sunny and clear, a really nice autumn day. As we entered the woods and made our way to the trail, the clouds started to move in. It got grayer and a little cold, nothing major. Haley and I were enjoying shuffling through the leaves, and it sounded like the sound of the leaves were being echoed, like we'd shuffle, and something would shuffle behind us. I stopped and told Haley that something was copying me. She shuffled forward and said, "See, I'm not copying you." After she shuffled, we heard the leaves move behind us, up the hill a bit, and we both turned to see if it was a deer or something else. But what we saw was something entirely different. It was like a man deer or a deer man, or whatever you would want to call it. It was coming right towards us. We knew how protective they get, and we knew that the buck could get a little gnarly too. So as we were looking, we heard the lowest growl that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Haley grabbed my arm, and we slowly started backing up. I swear on my mother's grave that we backed up. You could see the leaves moving like something was walking through them, but we couldn't see them actually move. It was only about 30 feet away, and we would move behind trees to try to get a better look while backing up. I was trying to rationalize it in my brain by saying it was just a deer. The leaves moved out of the way of whatever was walking through them, and it was large. It kept coming down the hill just behind us, and the growl came again, louder this time. A wave of fear washed over me as I realized this was no ordinary encounter. Fire pit. The crackling flames provided a sense of warmth and security amidst the looming darkness of the forest. As we settled in for the night, I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling that lingered in the air. The woods seemed unusually quiet, devoid of the usual nocturnal sounds. Despite my unease, exhaustion soon overtook me, and I drifted into a fitful sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a strange sensation, a feeling of being watched. I lay still, straining my ears for any sound that might indicate the presence of another being. That's when I heard it. The faint rustling of leaves, almost imperceptible against the backdrop of the night. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened intently, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I dared not move, fearing that any sudden movement might alert whatever lurked in the shadows. Then, from the darkness beyond the reach of our campfire, came a low, guttural growl, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. My mother stirred beside me, sensing the tension in the air. Without a word, we exchanged a knowing glance, silently acknowledging the presence of something unnatural in the forest. In that moment, instinct took over. With practiced efficiency, we doused the fire and retreated into the safety of our tent, zipping it shut behind us. The darkness outside pressed in, suffocating and oppressive. For what felt like an eternity, we lay huddled together in the darkness, our breaths coming in shallow gasps, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the tension dissipated. The forest fell silent once more, as if whatever had been lurking in the shadows had vanished into the night. Morning came, casting a golden glow over the forest, banishing the lingering shadows of the night. We emerged from our tent, weary but unharmed, the events of the previous night already beginning to fade into the recesses of memory. As we resumed our journey along the trail, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. The forest seemed to watch us with wary eyes, as if harboring secrets too dark to be spoken aloud. To this day, I can't say for certain what we encountered that night. A trick of the imagination, perhaps, or something far more sinister. But one thing is for sure. The memory of that night in the woods will haunt me for the rest of my days. A constant reminder of the thin veil that separates the world of man from the realm of the unknown. An interest in spending time outdoors. We chose a secluded spot deep in the woods, far away from any civilization, to immerse ourselves in nature and escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Little did we know our idyllic camping trip would soon turn into a nightmare. The first night passed without incident. We set up our tent, built a fire, and enjoyed a peaceful evening under the stars. As the night grew darker, we retreated into the warmth of our sleeping bags, lulled to sleep by the soothing sounds of the forest. Tea wasn't until the second night that things took a sinister turn. We had just finished dinner and were sitting by the fire, basking in its comforting glow, when we heard it. A faint rustling in the underbrush, followed by a low, guttural growl. At first, we brushed it off as the nocturnal activities of woodland creatures. But as the sound grew closer, our unease mounted. My girlfriend clutched my arm, her eyes wide with fear, as we strained to peer into the darkness beyond the fire's reach. That's when we saw it. A pair of glowing eyes, shining like beacons in the night. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized we were not alone in the woods. Whatever lurked in the shadows was watching us, its intentions unknown. Instinct took over, and without a word, we extinguished the fire and retreated into the safety of our tent. Zipping it shut behind us, we huddled together in the darkness, our breaths coming in shallow gasps as we listened to the ominous sounds outside. For hours, we lay awake, paralyzed by fear, as the unseen presence prowled around our campsite. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down my spine, until finally, exhaustion overtook us, and we drifted into a fitful sleep. When we awoke the next morning, the forest was silent once more, as if the events of the previous night had never occurred. We packed up our belongings hastily, eager to put distance between ourselves and whatever lurked in the shadows. As we made our way back to civilization, we couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that lingered in the air. The woods seemed to whisper secrets of ancient evils, warning us to tread carefully, lest we meet the same fate as those who had gone before us. To this day, I cannot say for certain what we encountered in the woods that night. A trick of the imagination, perhaps, or something far more sinister. But one thing is for sure. Our camping trip had been irrevocably tainted by the presence of a malevolent force that lurked in the darkness, waiting to claim its next victim. Features, but its presence sent a chill down our spines. We quickened our pace, eager to leave the oppressive atmosphere behind us. Back at the campsite, we tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over us. We built a fire and cooked dinner, hoping to distract ourselves from the unsettling encounter. But as the night wore on, the sense of dread only grew stronger. As we settled into our tent for the night, we heard strange noises echoing through the forest. Whispers carried on the wind, unnatural and unsettling. My friend and I exchanged nervous glances, our imaginations running wild with fear. Suddenly, the whispers turned into screams, agonized cries that pierced the darkness with their intensity. We froze in terror, unsure of what to do. Should we investigate or stay hidden in our tent, hoping whatever lurked outside would go away? But before we could make a decision, the screams stopped abruptly, leaving behind an eerie silence that was almost worse than the noise itself. We huddled together, listening for any sign of danger. But the forest remained eerily quiet. Hours passed, each minute feeling like an eternity, until finally, the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees. Relieved, we emerged from our tent, eager to put the nightmare behind us. But as we packed up our campsite and prepared to leave, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that whatever had terrorized us in the night was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. As we drove away from Yellowstone, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, a sense of escape from the darkness that had consumed our camping trip. But the memory of that night would stay with me forever, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the wilderness, waiting to prey on the unsuspecting. From that day on, I vowed never to return to Yellowstone, to never again venture into the heart of the wilderness, where the line between reality and nightmare is dangerously thin. For in the depths of the forest, where the shadows loom large and the silence is deafening, there are things that defy explanation, things that should never be encountered by mortal men. It grew too dark, while the others started unpacking our gear and setting up the tents. As the flames crackled and danced, casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees, the air was filled with laughter and excitement. We spent the evening swapping stories and reminiscing about our high school days, the warmth of the fire warding off the chill of the night, the sound of the river flowing nearby added to the tranquil ambience, creating a sense of peace and serenity that washed over us like a gentle tide. As the night wore on, we roasted marshmallows over the fire, savoring the sweet, sticky treats as we watched the stars emerge, one by one, in the night sky. It was a moment of pure bliss, a fleeting glimpse of the beauty and wonder of the natural world. But as the fire began to die down and the darkness closed in around us, a sense of unease crept over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something lurked in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the firelight. I brushed off my fears as irrational, chalking them up to the overactive imagination of someone who had watched too many horror movies. But as the night wore on, the feeling only grew stronger until it became almost unbearable. Suddenly, the laughter and chatter died down, replaced by a tense silence that hung heavy in the air. We exchanged nervous glances, each of us acutely aware of the oppressive atmosphere that surrounded us. Then, without warning, came the sound, a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before, a primal sound that spoke of danger and aggression. Panic surged through me, adrenaline flooding my veins as I scrambled to my feet, searching frantically for the source of the noise. But all I could see was darkness, the impenetrable blackness of the night. In that moment, instinct took over, and without a word, we fled into the safety of our tents. zipping them shut behind us, we huddled together in the darkness, our hearts pounding in our chests as we listened to the growls grow louder and more menacing outside. For hours, we lay awake, paralyzed by fear, as the creature prowled around our campsite, its presence a looming shadow in the night. And when morning finally came, we packed up our belongings and fled the Pacific Crest Trail, leaving behind the beauty and wonder of the wilderness for the safety and security of civilization. To this day, I still don't know what lurked in the darkness that night. A trick of the mind, perhaps, or something far more sinister. But one thing is for certain. My camping trip on the Pacific Crest Trail was a journey into the unknown, a brush with the mysteries of the natural world that I will never forget. From the trees surrounding us on all sides, panic surged through me as I realized we were trapped, caught like prey in a hunter's snare. I glanced around wildly, searching for any means of escape, but the dense wall of men blocked every path. Ian tightened his grip on my elbow, his expression grim as he assessed our situation. "We need to stay calm and think this through," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped us all. But staying calm was easier said than done as the men closed in around us, their masked faces giving away nothing of their intentions. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my heart pounding in my chest as I braced myself for whatever was to come. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tense silence, a deep, authoritative voice that seemed to command the attention of everyone present. "Hold it right there," it boomed, echoing through the clearing. We all froze, turning to see who had spoken. Emerging from the trees was a figure clad in a ranger uniform, his badge glinting in the dim light of the clearing. Relief washed over me as I realized help had arrived. But it was short-lived as the ranger leveled his gaze at us, his expression stern. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes flicking from one of us to the next. Before any of us could respond, the men in the orange hoodies spoke up, their voices low and menacing. "These kids trespassed on our hunting grounds," one of them said, his voice dripping with malice. "We were just teaching them a lesson." The ranger's brow furrowed in confusion, but he seemed to sense that something wasn't right. "Is that so?" he said, his tone skeptical. "And what lesson would that be exactly?" The men faltered, exchanging uneasy glances amongst themselves. It was clear they hadn't expected to be questioned, their facade of authority crumbling under the ranger's scrutiny. But before they could respond, the ranger stepped forward, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "I think it's time you boys left," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. "And if I ever catch you harassing these kids again, you'll answer to me." With that, the men in the orange hoodies slunk away, disappearing into the depths of the forest as quickly as they had appeared. The tension in the clearing eased, replaced by a sense of relief as the ranger turned to us, a reassuring smile on his face. "You kids should head back to your campsite," he said, his voice gentle. "And be careful out here. These woods can be dangerous if you're not careful." We nodded, grateful for his intervention, and quickly made our way back through the trees, the sounds of the forest welcoming us home. As we emerged into the familiar surroundings of our campsite, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the ranger who had come to our rescue, a guardian angel in the wilderness, watching over us when we needed it most. Again, the memories of that horrific day will haunt me forever, and I can't shake the guilt of leaving my friends behind. The loss of Ian, Nova, Sadie, and Katie weighs heavily on my heart. Their lives senselessly taken by those twisted hunters in the woods. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the gruesome scene, I felt a chill run down my spine. The forest that had once seemed so inviting now felt like a nightmare, hiding unspeakable horrors beneath its tranquil facade. I vowed never to return to those woods, never to risk encountering those hunters again. But even as I walked away, leaving behind the nightmare that had claimed the lives of my friends, I knew that the memories of that day would stay with me forever. A constant reminder of the darkness that lurks in the heart of even the most beautiful places. In closing, the events that unfolded on that fateful day will forever be etched into my memory. The Pacific Crest Trail, once a symbol of adventure and natural beauty, now holds a darker significance for me, a reminder of the horrors that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most idyllic settings. The loss of my friends, Ian, Nova, Sadie, and Katie, weighs heavily on my heart. Their lives cut short by senseless violence. I can only hope that they have found peace wherever they may be. As I reflect on that harrowing experience, I am reminded of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment we have. Though I may never fully understand the motives behind the actions of those hunters, I know that their brutality has left an indelible mark on me, shaping my perspective on the world in ways I never could have imagined. Moving forward, I will carry the memories of my friends with me, honoring their lives by living each day to the fullest and never taking the beauty of life for granted. And while I may never return to the Pacific Crest Trail, I will always hold on to the lessons learned from that tragic day, finding solace in the bonds of friendship and the strength of the human spirit to endure even the darkest of times.